Hi there, and welcome to Rise Like Lions. I'm Kevin.
I'm Dave.
Good to see everyone here, and welcome to the second in our election special. So, we have a federal election coming up here in Canada, and we are going to be covering the platforms of four of the major parties: the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, the NDP, and the Greens. And my good buddy Dave here is wearing a shirt that maybe suggests who he might be
Oh no,
leaning towards.
I just love orange.
Just love orange.
Totally into orange.
Yeah, I love orange too. And I mean, right now too, orange is the color for.
I had an orange for breakfast.
Oh, right on. Okay,
Oh,
it's a theme then today. It's also the color being used to talk about the children at the residential schools as well, right? And
Yes.
the raise issue. So it's for a lot of good reasons. Orange is a fine color. So anyway, folks, today we're going to start by talking about the two big parties, the two parties of the elite, as it were, in Canada, the Conservatives and the Liberals. So without further ado, let's look at, first of all, the Conservative Party of Canada and their platform. So when you go to the Conservative Party website, and this is a pretty cringy photo. So this is Aaron O'Toole, and it looks like he's about to abduct a young black child. Anyway, they're definitely going for a certain image. They're going for a very shiny, happy, diverse, friendly, trying to project the image that the Liberals are so good at, which is really being the party for all Canadians, really sort of addressing all of us and all of our issues and whatnot. So it's interesting to see what they've done there in terms of just their imaging. But we want to get into the actual platform itself. And so right on their website, you can go to read the plan, and we're going to read the plan. Now, to be clear, they have a summary here, but they also put out, which I was a little bit surprised to see, a fairly robust policy document, which is, to the tune of about 170 pages. And so you can download that, and if you hate your life, you can read through that, and you can encounter in really kind of nauseous detail all of the things that the Conservative Party wants to do. So just to recap, folks, what we did in the last episode is we looked at the various issues that we thought were the big issues. And just to sort of recap those were the environment, the economy, inequality, affordable housing, health, education, and public services, tax reform, First Nations, police reform, electoral reform, and foreign policy. So that's quite a bit of stuff we talked about in our last episode. And what I'm going to do here, I have to be honest, is I'm not going to go through absolutely all 10 of those things and every single aspect of the platforms in front of me. That would just kind of take a little bit too much time. But I wanted to start with the highlights and I guess the overall approach that the various parties are taking. And so when you're looking at the Conservative Party of Canada, they, like I said, in their branding and in how a lot of this stuff is messaged, they're trying to put forth this, like, we are governing for all Canadians, as opposed to Stephen Harper, who was a little bit clear of, we're governing for old stock Canadians. Basically, middle class and up white folks is kind of the vibe that Harper was giving off. So the Conservatives are trying to move away from that. But what are they talking about here? Well, first of all, it's interesting. Their language is all about secure. So you got to love the Conservatives, even though they're trying to diversify a little bit. They still know who their base is, right? So this is all about securing things. We're going to secure jobs, secure accountability. So to start out, the Conservatives are, historically speaking in Canada, a party of the business class. And so you can kind of see this in their policy documents and in their approach. They do have some stuff on the economy that is actually fairly strong. And so what they're talking about is a lot of incentives for business to get them back up and running. And some of this stuff is actually good. So for instance, they have this program they talk about in their platform about subsidizing new hires for small businesses, paying 50% of the wages of any new hires for up to a year. That's actually not a bad idea. But what's interesting about all of their targeted sort of economic incentives, so this is sort of part of their plan that's about getting us back from COVID, is all of these things, they make it explicit that really their overarching goal is to balance the budget, right? And so this is how they think that we're going to recover fully from COVID, or we're going to stimulate the economies. We've got to balance the budget. So they talk about a lot of incentives and bits of stimulus for the economy, but they make it very clear it's all very time limited. So the conservative plan is all about, here's a little shot in the arm, and then let's get back to balancing the budget, which basically means austerity, right? Let's get back to, trimming back on our social programs, trimming back on our government spending. So this is a recurring theme you're going to see throughout their plan, even though there's some good stuff. Like I said, that 50% subsidy of wages for new hires, that's a great plan, but it's going to be temporary. Another example of this too is they have this idea of a super EI fund that they're going to create. So an EI that pays 75% of wages, as opposed to the current woefully pathetic 55% of wages that our EI program pays. And the conservatives say, well, we're going to bring this in, but only if a province is in recession for a certain amount of time, determined by this amount of GDP contraction. So they have this sort of labyrinthine formula to determine when a province is in recession. And then when they're in recession, they temporarily get this extra 75% EI, as opposed to simply increasing EI payments so that they're actually sufficient. So this, again, is something that's very consistent with the conservative approach. And we're going to see it too when we talk about, what they're willing to do for low-income folks, because there's some things in here that seem on the surface really cool. And one example is the Canadian worker benefit. Now, this is something that the Trudeau government actually brought in, and it is a tax subsidy for low-income workers. And it is, in ways, it's good because it is a refundable tax credit versus a non-refundable tax credit. And the difference, this is an important difference for folks to understand. Normally, when you're paying your income tax at the end of the year, you have tax credits that can go against the tax you would have paid. And these tax credits, most of them are what's known as non-refundable, which means that you can only use them to offset the tax you've paid. And if you've already offset all of the tax you've paid, then you don't get any additional money back from those tax credits. But a refundable tax credit means you get that money back regardless. So even if you didn't pay a lot of tax, so say maybe you're a low-income worker and you paid $1,000 in tax. Well, if you then get from the government a $2,000 refundable tax credit, that means they're going to give you $1,000 back, right? Not to get too much into the mathematical weeds, but it's an important distinction to think about. So the conservatives are big on their tax breaks, their tax incentives. This is one of the main tools, I'd say the main tool that they use to, whether it's to incentivize businesses or to support low-income workers. But again, folks, the devil is in the details. So what the conservatives have in their platform here is they have this very, it sounds like a really big expansion to the Canadian worker benefit. So this is in their sort of secure our economy section of the plan. And what they talk about is we're going to increase the Canada worker benefit. So we're going to add all of these tax credits for low-income workers. And it's like, wow, well, that sounds kind of good. They're going to really increase them quite a bit. Until you look at actually the cutoffs for qualifying for the Canada worker benefit. Well, for an individual, the cutoff is, I believe, $24,000 a year in income. So if you make over $24,000 a year in income as an individual, you don't qualify for this Canada worker benefit at all. And so the devil's in the details. So all these extra tax credits, first of all, if you're a minimum wage worker in Canada, so say in Ontario, you're making $14 an hour and you're working full time, you're making about $29,000 a year. You're totally not eligible for any of these tax credits whatsoever. So this is what I like to sometimes call a bullshit benefit, because it really doesn't benefit almost anyone by how it's defined, by how the program is actually defined. And same thing for families. The conservatives are like, oh, we're going to increase this tax benefit for families. But if your family income is over $36,000 a year, you don't qualify for it. Folks, that's not a lot of money. Like I said, if you're working minimum wage full time, you don't qualify for any of this. So who this does help is maybe part-time minimum wage workers. So, to give them some credit, I guess, no pun intended, those credits can help those minimum wage workers. However, None of these things are as effective as universal entitlements, universal benefits. So, for instance, a raise to the minimum wage is far more effective. A guaranteed annual income is far more effective. And these are simply not the tools that conservatives are going to use. They're simply not interested in them. And so really what you get here is a suite of policy options for the economy, for low-income people, that again, it's based on benefits that don't really benefit that many people. And it's also based on short-term stimulus. Whereas really the normal approach here in terms of their economic policy is straight up neoliberalism. And so, again, that word gets thrown around a lot. Neoliberalism is an economic philosophy that basically is it's capitalism or oligarchy pushing back against the welfare state, trying to dismantle any of these social programs or any of these real progressive gains that working people have made, mostly since World War II. Neoliberalism is like the movement to roll all that back. So it involves privatization and tax cuts for the wealthy and business incentives, these sorts of things. So that is the conservative approach. Having said that, their policy document is interesting because it does touch on a lot of different issues, affordable housing, for instance. And the conservatives say, their policy is very bold. When you read it, it says, well, we're going to build 1 million homes. And it's like, wow, well, that sounds really cool. But you get into the weeds on it. And again, they don't really say a lot about affordable homes and what will make those homes affordable. And also, how are they going to get those 1 million homes built? You guessed it, incentives. Well, they're going to give tax incentives to developers to encourage them to build more homes. It's all very vague, and you really get this sense that there's no actual dedicated money to affordable housing. There's no actual rules which, for instance, would mandate the creation of affordable housing if you're a developer. Tools such as inclusionary zoning, where you sort of say, hey, listen, if you're going to build 100 units of housing in a development, that 10% or 15% of them need to be affordable. So you won't see anything like that in the conservative platform whatsoever. So moving on, there's some other interesting issues too. One of the big things we talked about as one of our big issues is the environment. And so, the conservatives, their platform it's kind of interesting to read because they have a whole section on the environment. And this is because of the kind of party they're trying to be. They are trying to present themselves as a party for all Canadians. And this is very different, for instance, if you read the platform, God forbid, of the People's Party of Canada, where their segment on the environment is literally laughable. It is climate change denialism in black and white. They literally are bragging about it on their website, basically being like, carbon's awesome, it's great. Who's made of carbon? People, so it's that level of idiocy. But the conservatives talk the game, but what is actually in it? Well, nothing about the tar sands, nothing about curbing emissions from the oil and gas industry, and these are the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. And so, again, the devil is in the details, and there's really not a lot there when you look at the details. And so, when at the end of the day with the Conservative Party platform, what you are getting is you're getting neoliberalism. You are getting this theory that everything's basically okay. The free market economy is going to kind of handle everything. All we need to do is tweak around the edges, offer a few tax breaks here, a few tax incentives there. And then at the end of the day, everything is just going to sort of play itself out. When bad times happen, like COVID, for instance, well, you need temporary sprinkles of incentive, and then the market's just going to kind of take over. So that's the conservative approach to the economy. Another big thing I'll say too is foreign policy. And so this is something that, when we talked about this in the last episode, we said, folks, you're not going to hear a lot about foreign policy in the electoral debates. Sadly, because Canada really is a player on the world stage. What do the conservatives say about foreign policy? Well, they want us to double down on a close relationship with the United States. They want us to ramp up our engagement in U.S. geopolitical interests and adventures. The conservative platform specifically calls out Russia, China, and Iran. So, these three bugaboos that the United States keeps trying to convince us all are existential threats to our free North American way of life. It has a segment on, combating Chinese aggression, And what's interesting is just before this podcast, I was able to sit down on a great talk by the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. They're a wonderful new organization that's been created that offers a really critical look at Canadian foreign policy. And in this talk that I was able to attend, the great Eve Engler, who is a national treasure, if you ask me, he's an author, a Canadian author who's written, I believe it's 8 or 9 books now on Canadian foreign policy. And he talked about basically the abysmal state of foreign policy in Canada and how we really are, kind of a nakedly imperialist nation in a lot of ways. And so the Conservative Party platform is just doubling down on that. And it really is doubling down on this idea that, China is somehow an existential threat, even though, as was pointed out at the talk that I attended, the US has over 800 military bases currently outside of its borders. 800 military bases around the world, including bases that circle China. How many does China have? 1 in Djibouti, the international powerhouse of Djibouti. China has 1 little military base. So again, it's kind of laughable that we're being presented this image of a foreign policy that is, our very existence is threatened by Russia and China. So that's what you get on the foreign policy front from the Conservative Party of Canada platform. The last thing I'll say, folks, because I don't want to make these breakdowns too long, is that in the overarching questions, when I say, for instance, something like with the Conservatives, you're going to get neoliberalism, what that means is that you're not going to get any new universal programs. You're going to get a lot of privatization. So, and many times through the Conservative platform, they talk about, well, in terms of healthcare, for instance, I haven't mentioned this. They say a big problem in Canada is the federal government is being mean to big pharma, right? In terms of using federal government clout to negotiate cheaper drug prices, which is something we do in Canada, which is why a lot of Americans like buying cheap Canadian drugs, right? So, and to the Conservatives, this is a big problem. It's like us being mean to big pharma. And in so many other places in their platform, when they talk about, for instance, whether it's agriculture or mining, they talk about more and more partnerships with the private sector. There's these lines of like, oh, that doesn't mean more government regulation. Boo, hiss, it means more public-private partnerships, more partnering with the big mining companies and the big agriculture companies. So again, if that's your cup of tea, folks, if you're basically, if you're the director of a large mining company in Canada, I kind of know who you're going to vote for. And guess what? They're going to do well by you. They're going to have your interests at heart, because that's kind of what the Conservative Party of Canada does. So at the end of the day, folks, I wouldn't buy it that they've changed their stripes. They sure have changed their branding, and I guess you got to give them some props for that. They've got some better marketers working on this. But really, at the end of the day, I mean, you are still seeing really the same old Conservative Party of Canada. So I think we'll maybe leave it off there. And Dave, we've seen a lot of Conservative governments come and go federally. And what's your sort of sense of Erin O'Toole and what he's trying to bring forward these days? Is he any different?
Sure. He actually is. He is a bit different. At least they're moving away from some of the attachments to American style, like republicanism.
Yeah.
And that is a good sign, I think. I don't think it's like legitimate that their intention would be to really move that way, but at least having to make their image that way, that's an improvement for all of us, at least until everybody starts forgetting what it was like to go through this time without proper universal programs applying to everyone. And then they'll just slide back into the same thing. I'm quite certain of it. I really don't see them having any chance because, they're losing the crazies to the People's Party.
Yeah.
Funny name.
Yeah.
For them. And they're so divided out west. Really, they're only trying to eat into the Liberals. And I'm seeing for the first time ever maybe a bit of bent, at least for younger Liberals, more towards the other orange,
Yeah.
So I think it'd be a lot harder of a fight to drag them that way, which is why they're presenting with that cleaner, more progressive conservative look.
You're right, and it's kind of like it's so true. So the branding has changed, and I think that's maybe not trivial. And I'm glad you said that. I made it sound a little more trivial than it really is. I think they realize that they need to be going more towards the center, even in terms of their branding and their messaging. Right? They have done that, and yet again, what's interesting is at the end of the day, it is a lot of the same stuff. It's the same ideology backing it up.
Yeah.
And one thing I just want to point out too, and just quickly, I forgot this part when it comes to the climate, because I'm glad you mentioned, the real wingnuts, the right wing wingnuts, are gravitating more towards the People's Party of Canada, and I think that's fine by me. I mean,
That's great.
Yeah, exactly.
People's Party, they're excellent.
Yeah,
you know
let's have a
what?
clearly defined place.
If you're conservative, don't mess around with these ones compromising with liberals. Go all the way PC. Yeah. And there's a few others where they wear like cowboy hats and stuff that are really great too.
Definitely, and
Throw some votes that way.
Yeah, like Wild Rose and stuff like that.
Yeah, they're wonderful. They want Canada to be stable and secure. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's go for it.
It's helpful too, just on a community level, folks, because everywhere you see a People's Party of Canada sign on a lawn, it's a really helpful indication that a complete douchebag lives there. I have.
Have you?
Oh, Dave,
no.
I was out the other day.
I've seen literally only one conservative sign, never mind a People's Party.
Where you are, and I was out driving in Niagara in that region the other day, and it was really distressing. I couldn't believe it. I was driving with my friend, and I remember remarking like in a sense of shock and outrage how many People's Party of Canada signs I saw. But again, then I was thinking, well, okay, you know that person's most likely a bit of a dick, and they've handily advertised that.
They're highly confused, very stressed.
Maybe confused.
Not sure what they're doing.
That's charitable, man. I like that.
Yeah.
But I was going to say as well, Dave, one thing that's interesting about when we talk about the different branding that the conservatives are coming at us with, one of the things that we're going to see when we look at the conservative platform, or when you do your own research, tell me if you agree with my take on it or not, but you're going to see a disconnect between the verbiage and the reality, right? And so this is something that's maybe pretty obvious when you look at the shiny, happy image the conservatives are trying to project. But you're going to see it with the liberals too when we cover their platform. But they're more sophisticated. They're a much more sophisticated beast, the liberals and the conservatives, right? So it's a different.
The liberal playbook's very clever.
It very much is, and it's on display on their platform. But I just want to give one example, folks, of the Conservative Party platform that was a little bit laughable, because they're talking about climate change. And again, so what separates the conservatives from the PPC is the conservatives are like, oh, climate change is totally real. It's so real, we're going to do these 6 non-things to not address it. That's our commitment to you. And after they sort of do that in their platform, it's really funny. They go, well, we've got to realize Canada only accounts for 2% of world greenhouse gas emissions. And you read that and you're like, well, wait a second. Well, the Chinese are the ones that are the problem, and it kind of implicates this in the plan. But of course, and 90% of you are already with me on this. It doesn't matter that overall we're 2%. What's our per capita emissions? Guess what, folks? We're top 3 in the world.
We lead in mining in the world. That alone. I mean, that's technically not happening right in the country. Oh, well, okay then.
Yeah.
Okay.
And even you're right. So let alone our global
nickel
footprint.
mining, so many things. Like ask a Brazilian.
Yeah. So our global footprint is crazy. But even in terms of domestic greenhouse gas production, we are horrible. The tar sands. We tend to be still a very energy wasteful society in terms of how we produce and consume. So there's so much to do. So that's a classic example. That's just pure bullshit, and they put it in there because it's a great soundbite. Yeah, it's a great talking point, but really it's
how those who would vote conservative want to feel. About it. Yeah. But we tried that. We tried wanting to feel different ways. Oh yes, and also get all you can so you can solve it later. We tried that. Now if it's not flooding, it's on fire.
Yeah,
already.
Yeah.
So there isn't even any time left for it.
It's status quo, And the last thing I'll say too, just about the conservatives, to give them their due, because they are trying to be this more centrist appearing party. They do talk about First Nations people, and they talk about wanting to improve the economic conditions of Native people. They want to talk about addressing poverty on reservations. They do not, however, talk about truth and reconciliation necessarily.
Yeah.
They don't mention anything about land claims or autonomy or self-government. And this is where we're going to see a big contrast, folks, between them and the Liberals, who, like I said, much more savvy in terms of playing this game. So at the end of the day, you really get a sense from the Conservatives that they are pretty much status quo. That's kind of what they're aiming for. Status quo with a much smarter approach to branding and messaging. And at the end of the day, hey, if you like neoliberalism, folks, if you like industrial capitalism, if you're all down with the destruction of the biosphere, give these folks your vote. If you're not, maybe pass on that and consider some of the other parties we're going to talk about. So anyway, that is it for the Conservative Party platform breakdown. Thanks very much for joining us. Next episode, we tackle the Liberals.